So welcome everybody. My name is Paul Smyers. I'm a professional real estate agent in southwestern Virginia. And my little site here, as you see, there's a number of videos. And I talk a little bit about different aspects of the real estate business, how to get the most out of your transaction and buying and selling land. I love rural life. I live in the countryside in a beautiful area in the Shenandoah Valley near the Blue Ridge Parkway. It's lovely in Virginia, and it's a great place to buy land, and there's a lot of agriculture going on and timbering going on in Virginia. So if you're one of those people who feel like they might want to get out of the city and at least get a country place, maybe a getaway place or a family gathering kind of place, then there's a whole lot of opportunities here in the state of Virginia, and that's why I live here. So one thing I want to talk a little bit about is getting the most when you buy a piece of property. A lot of people, first-time buyers, or even old, they might have bought several houses, but they may not have really thought carefully about when they buy something to get, because you put a lot of money into buying a house, and you might stay there for a really long time. So there's all the traditional things that people think about when they buy a house, and like what does the bathroom look like, and how big is the tub, and how big is the closet, and how many cars can you put in the garage, and stuff like that. Those are common things that people think about in terms of value, but out here in the rural area, there's a lot more to it because, for one thing, a piece of land might have a water supply on it. It might have a great soil that you can plant and have, there's a lot of different, it might have great, fantastic views. And for example, or maybe it adjoins another huge open piece of land that you don't need to pay taxes on, but nobody's ever going to build there. So then you have the advantage, you can have a nice piece of land right next to that kind of a situation. Like in Virginia, there's a number of national forests and regional forests and parks and so on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to get value and see things a little differently when you look at your property. Because again, especially if you're moving out of the country, out into the country, and you haven't lived in a rural area for a while, there's a lot of things that you want to think about. For example, let's say your driveway. There's a lot of hills in Virginia. And once in a while, it does snow some in Virginia, certain parts, especially depending on where you are. And now and then you can have a really big snowstorm. And you've got to think of a few things about, like maybe tree limbs that go down in ice storms. There's things that, for example, how steep is your driveway? If you can't get your car up, you maybe need a four-wheel drive vehicle. So these kind of things that are subtle variations in property excuse me, that many people don't think about when they buy land. Another thing, for example, is trees. Let's say if you're the kind of person who loves a wood stove and that sort of thing, you buy a piece of land that has a wooded area, you can harvest wood from that for a long time and get free firewood while slowly thinning out an area that you don't have to pay somebody to do. So good hardwood on the land is a resource that you can use for some reason. And if you have a big enough piece of land, I heard of a sale, for example, the guy, I think he paid $100,000 for a piece of land. And then he got $75,000 worth of lumber off it. Now, there are lumber and timber merchants out there who come and evaluate the wood. I mean, naturally, it takes a lot of work and a lot of money to actually harvest a lot of wood, but certain kinds of trees, for example, the hardwoods, that if they're straight, they make good boards, and if they're not straight, they can still be sold as firewood. There's pines that get harvested about every 20 years or so, and they get mulched up and used into different kind of things, that plywood and so on. So then there's, of course, things that add scenic value. For example, you buy a piece of land that, look, there's one piece of property and maybe it has a better house, but this piece of property over here, it's got a fantastic view, and you can change the house, but you can't change the land. So think carefully about the piece of property, the land that you're buying. What is it adjoin? What's around you? You see, and it pays a little bit to go online. There's a lot of different resources now online. One is the GIS system that every county has. You can find all kinds of amazing information in the GIS system online, including the floodplain and the 500-year flood level, the terrain, the altitude, the zoning. You can even find out who owns a property. In many of those states, you can find out when the last transaction was and what was assessed at. So all these kind of things, when you think about buying land, think of what they call the, it's not, you can't put it's hard to put a money value on a view, for example. You see, and it's what somebody will build on or what will pay for it for a nice view. Now, another thing to think about carefully is the kind of soil and land that you're on, because there's certain kinds of terrain that are really, really difficult to build on. For example, they might not be able to handle a septic system. They're rocky and or something, and they're just hard to do anything with. See that, or maybe it's too steep. But if the hillside is too steep, it'll cost a lot of money. I've seen homes built on a steep terrain with 30 or 40, 50 degree angles, but it's not easy. You know, there's extra expenses involved. So that's another thing. And for example, another thing about a piece of land, let's say if you find, like, you can buy a piece of property that has already got a garden. If it already has a fence on it, maybe it's already got a shed. A shed, you can get a 10 by 12 shed. I think they cost like $8,000 or $9,000, and someone will bring it to you, and then you got to prepare the place for it to stay. But you see a shed sitting on a property, you say, well, that just saved me some bucks. The guy who owns the shed might have just, well, that's been there for 25 years. To me, it's like whatever. But when you buy a property, if it has some kind of outbuildings, some facilities, some storage, or a place to keep animals, or something like that, it's another advantage to think about when you buy a piece of property out in the country. One is access. Now in Virginia, there's a lot of really dirt roads. There's a lot of gravel roads out there that are pretty well maintained. They're on the map. You can go down there with a pickup truck or a car even. There are some that I've been on with a Jeep that frankly I don't recommend anybody go on. But Virginia does have a lot of very, very rural, beautiful, beautiful scenic roads where hardly any cars go down this road. But they're not like so remote like in Colorado or a steep mountainous zone. Virginia has a lot of really habitable terrain. There's no, like up in the Adirondacks, for example, in New York State, where I used to live, there's some areas that are beautiful, but it's hard to build anything there. So you're certainly not going to be able to build a mall and a big steep, thing. So it's just really recreation land. Here in Virginia, there's a huge amount of land production involving cattle. Angus cattle are very popular here. Quite a few sheep. There's lots and lots of things like corn and soybean and even sunflowers, and there's a lot of orchards. You can find, in the old days, people lived on the land and they had lots of trees. You can find a piece of property that has, again, you might even have like 10 fruit trees on it. I lived on one apartment like that one time. It was an old orchard, long time ago, but nobody really cut down the trees, so I had like a dozen apple trees on, and they're beautiful every spring. The birds came and the deer came. So all of these things I suggest you look at when you think about buying. And again, people look on Zillow, and it's a very helpful tool to go on to the internet, obviously, and you see a lot of pictures. But remember, the pictures have some kind of distortions. They don't show everything. They don't show the surrounding terrain. And there's a lot of things that you would want to know. So I do a lot of real estate scouting, and someone says, hey, can you look for such kind of property for me? And then they're busy earning their money, and I'm busy, going out and trying to find out things for them, because they were coming from an out of town situation, and I can't run over there every day, every weekend just to look at property, you see. So that's why you have someone like me as a buyer agent. So anyway, I'm trying to give you a little bit of help, and I don't want to make these videos too long, and some information that's easy to access. Once again, you can find a property that has a little bit of development on it that saves you a lot of money and time. If it even has a driveway, even if there's just a little cleared area. A stream is very valuable, because if there's a stream there, there's water. That means you can have a well, and it won't be hard to make. So there's a lot of really great subtle things to think about. Once again, there's, just to recap a little bit before I close this off, there's your zoning, and there's your, like zoning, for example, that has open zoning it's a little more valuable, because then you have more freedom legally to do things with your property. So that's another thing to consider too, especially if you really want to live in countryside and have pigs and chickens. But there's hunting land around. Again, people who are into that, hunting and bow hunting and so on, or camping and hiking. You can live near an area where there's a trail nearby, or where there's a famous scenic area, or anything you desire. You can look around and consider where you're living, not just what you see on Zillow. That's really the summary I'm trying to make here. Whatever you see online, it has limits, and you really need some kind of hands-on. And I've handled transactions where I just sent videos back and forth, and it really helped because, hey, you're busy at work, I'll send you a great video of this piece of property I found. And it really can work that way. And I encourage people to contact me and use my email address, and I'll try to answer any questions that people have. And I do aerial photography. I have a pilot's license. I used to do aerial photography. I was a photographer. And this map behind me on my left side here is a 3D terrain map of a part of the Hudson Valley that includes Charlottesville and Waynesboro and Stanton. So thanks again for listening, and appreciate all the comments. And if you really have any questions, please feel free to contact me, and perhaps I can help you in some way. Thanks.